All right, welcome back to the channel. We've got a Monoblack deck here for Theros Standard, and this one takes a little bit of a different approach because you have some really interesting cards from Theros that fit in here, and there's already going to be a lot of people who want to build this deck, right? I mean, when they previewed Gray Merchant, everybody kind of got excited and already wanted to build it, so I figured it'd be wrong if I didn't cover this deck, even though I think you're going to see a lot of it. There's going to be a lot of different versions of it around. Looking at the deck list, though, you're starting out with 4 Knight of the Ebon Legions, 2 Shadow Spear, 3 Gutter Bones, 2 Foulmire Knight, sorry about that, 2 Timoret, 3 Ayara, 4 Murderous Rider, 2 Spawn of Mayhem, 2 Erebos, 2 Deathless Knight, 4 Drag to the Underworld, 1 Rankle, 4 Gray Merchant, and 1 Bolas's Citadel. Now, the interesting thing about this deck is it does very much start out as a mono black, kind of just like aggro deck. And the goal isn't necessarily just to beat your opponent all the way down. Like, the idea is you can get your opponent down to 9 or less, and your incremental damage can finish them off, right? Like, you have cards like Ayara that are going to drain every creature you have in a play. You know, and Ayara plus Gutter Bones is an interesting combo anyway, because you can run the Gutter Bones in, let it die, play one of your other creatures, get the Gutter Bones back, and kind of cycle that through. So that's good. You've also got Spawn of Mayhem, which you're going to hit your opponent every upkeep. You know, so that's a thing that contributes there as well. And then, not to mention, Gray Merchant itself is able to drain your opponent, and you gain that much, equal to the devotion you have to black. So there's a lot of ways to incrementally drain your opponent that could finish him off. Like, if you play a creature in turns 1, 2, 3 and get in 6 or 8 damage, you're already starting to get close to where you can inch it to a reasonable end state for the game. I included 2 Shadow Spears in this list. I think it's a card that's going to be pretty prevalent in a lot of decks, especially aggro decks, when you're not going to have a lot of ways that are going to give you the ability to remove those gods that are indestructible. This lets you at least take away the indestructibility on some cards, and it does have the other side of giving you some life gain as well. So that's not the worst thing, especially when you're talking about something like Deathless Knight. It allows you to keep getting something back from your graveyard, or getting it back from your graveyard, every time you gain life. So if it's the first time you gain life that turn, it's in your yard, you get it. You can play it next turn, it has haste. You run it into combat, cool. You can gain life, get it back, do it all over again. So that's a really nice inclusion. And then there's an interesting thing whenever you get Bolas's Citadel in play and have a Gray Merchant, because you're going to end up paying 5 to cast the Gray Merchant, but you're usually going to be gaining more than that. I mean, Bolas's Citadel alone gives you 3 black pips toward your devotion. So it's possible that something like Deathless Knight and your Bolas's Citadel are going to gain you significantly more than you're going to pay. But I think this deck also sets up well to activate Erebos, because you only need 5 devotion to black, and Ayara herself is 3. So Ayara and Erebos is 4. So anything else is going to put you over. So you're going to likely be attacking with Erebos quite often, and it's a 5/6, so that's nothing to turn your nose up at. And it gives you a way to get creatures back, or actually to kill creatures, and then allows you to draw cards whenever your creatures die. So there's a lot happening with this deck, and the life gain you have is equally as important as the drain or the life loss you have for your opponents. And so it's one of the things, if I were playing this, that I would be very careful about is keep track and try to figure out every turn what is the maximum amount you can either do or sustain between like damaging or draining your opponent and gaining life. I think that's where a lot of the games will be decided with this deck, because you could get caught up in situations where you might traditionally not want to attack, or you might do something differently than you would normally do. But the reality is, like, there's going to be enough of those situations where because of the makeup of this deck, you're going to have 2 or 3 extra point of damage you're not used to getting that are going to change your combat math or even just your math in general for the rest of the game. Especially when you're talking about like a Yara being on the table, and then it's like, okay, well, if I attack with some things and there's an Erebos out, okay, I can pay 2 life and I can get a card, or I can just sack a creature and then gain the 2 life and then get rid of a blocker so I can attack with something else. Like there's all these little incremental decisions that are going to come along with this, and I think that's the case with several Theros cards right now. Is until we figure out, well, combination, until we figure out the best overall cards to put in each slot and just figure out the best way to use them all, there's going to be a lot of kind of navigating and decision making that has to be done in the early stages of the format. So it'd be interesting to see which of these cards end up staying in the list or coming out as we move forward. I think of the list I presented over the last like 24 hours, this is probably the one that's closest to its final version, I would think. If anything, the smaller or early creatures could probably be adjusted, or maybe even the numbers of them plus or minus 1 or 2. But I think the card selection overall is pretty close to what I would want in here. It's got enough early creatures. It's got some things like Spawn of Mayhem that can go over the top. It's easy to activate your Erebos. There's a reasonable chance you could use Bolas' Citadel. It's got some long-term sort of combo-ish plays with things like Deathless Knight. You can kill almost any creature with Drag to the Underworld, which, by the way, I want to highlight that for a second because it's an instant that lets you destroy any creature. Granted, if the creature has indestructible, you won't kill it, but it's reduced for the number or for the amount of devotion that you have. But in this deck, you're almost always going to be casting this for 2, maybe 3, but almost always 2. So you're never going to play. I say never. You are very rarely ever going to play 4 for it. So it fits great in this deck. It's basically a terror with no downside, which is great. So it's between that and Murderous Rider, you have removal for just about everything you need. And since you have a couple of the Shadow Spears, technically everything is at least an option for you to kill. So that helps a bunch with this build. Looking at the lands, nothing really special here. Playing 4 castles, and the rest are basic swamps. The castles make sense again because you have so much life gain and incremental stuff here and there that if you have to lose 2 or 3 while you're hunting for a card, that's totally fine. The sideboard, I actually didn't include anything new here, and some of that was just for me not knowing 100% what the format's going to look like yet, and I was just kind of speculating on what cards I already know exist and where I could fit them in. So the only real card I want to talk about here is Grafdigger's Cage. I think with all of the new graveyard shenanigans that are going to be going on in Theros, this is a card that I would recommend you probably pick up a few more of right now. It could very well end up being pretty pricey in the next few months. I mean, just straight up, creatures in graveyards and libraries can't enter the battlefield. So anything that's planning on coming out of the graveyard likely isn't going to happen, and definitely won't while this Grafdigger's Cage is on the table. And there's a few different big cards in Theros that, I mean, legendary creatures and whatnot that people want to be playing with, and I'm sure we're going to see a lot of them over the first couple of weeks, that I would pack some Gravedigger's Cage just because. And if you end up not needing them, great, but I think it's probably the best sideboard card right now as we move into Theros. Other than that, Epic Downfall is also good because it exiles a card and doesn't send it to the graveyard. And Duresses Legions in also exiles, which is nice. And then Noxious Grasp and Cavalier of Night. Noxious Grasp mostly is kind of one-sided in here. I can't see a whole lot of major green decks right now, but I do see a lot of decks that could potentially be playing white or white and something. So Noxious Grasp is going to be a good fit there too. What would I say is kind of like my final thoughts on this is I don't think of this deck so much as just a mono black aggro deck. It has the ability to attack on that front, but ultimately it's kind of like half aggro, half mid range. You're trying to punch through damage to get your opponent, like I said, to somewhere 9 or less, and then you can kind of slow down and play the long game to drive to the finish. Interestingly, though, I could also see a lot of situations where you end up with an Erebos on the table and you're just smacking with Erebos for 4 or 5 turns, while they're chump blocking, and eventually just kill them with that. So there are a lot of ways to win in this deck. I can see times where you're going to finish opponent from 3 with just a Yara. You're going to drain somebody with a Gray Merchant when they're at 7 or 8 life. You're going to have some game where it's stalled out completely and you use Bolas's Citadel to play 4 or 5 cards. And there's going to be times where you just beat down with Erebos. So I'm a big fan. I like this deck. I like the variables of attack that it has. I love the fact that it can come at you from different angles. And I like that flexibility. You're not shoehorned into any one strategy. You're not stuck if you get a bad start. This has a lot of positives going for it. And even though it's not, I think, what people would have expected for a mono black deck to be, I think the life drain components in this deck will be very, very powerful. Yeah, it's definitely one I'm going to be booting up. Again, for those of you who haven't seen my other videos and got the notice, I will be participating in the Streamer Early Access Theros event. I was invited by Wizards of the Coast, so this will also be one of the decks that I key up and play on there if you want to check it out. I will be on from 9 p.m. to midnight, January 15th, Wednesday, that is tomorrow, Pacific time. But I will be on throughout the day as well if you want to check any of that out. I will actually be trying to save some of those games as well and put them over here on YouTube. So, yeah, thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time. I want to say thanks for watching the video, and remember to please like, subscribe, and comment because that helps a bunch. And if you want to keep up with me and my shenanigans, always feel free to follow me on Twitch and on Twitter, where we're just as active. Thanks. See you next time.